On the dusty outskirts of Ilado village, beneath a sun that burnt like vengeance, a man with no name and no roof to call his own dragged his feet across the red earth. The villagers called him Odeyemi, not because it was his name, but because it meant the man who came from nowhere. His beard was wild like the forest path, his shirt torn in 3 places, and his slippers were stitched together with string. But his eyes held the quiet fire of someone who had once known something better. In a world that forgot him, he remembered everything: his father's laughter, his mother's stew, the scholarship letter he had lost in a storm the same day he lost his way in life. The villagers had long stopped whispering about him. The day he was thrown off a moving trailer and staggered into Ilado with blood on his head had become old gossip. The chief's guards had once tried to chase him away, but he refused to leave. Not out of defiance, but because he had nowhere else to go. He became a fixture, like the broken well behind the church or the mango tree by the old mosque. Some pitied him. Others feared his silence. The children mocked him. The women hid their leftovers from him. Yet every morning he woke before the cock crowed, sat under the same palm tree, and watched the world with a patience that made people uncomfortable. It was on a Wednesday morning that the wind carried change into his life. The harmattan breeze blew soft, but carried the smell of burning palm oil and distant wood smoke. Odeyemi was heading toward the market dump, hoping to find half-eaten bread or a bruised fruit. As he crossed the narrow wooden bridge over the stream, he saw her. An old woman, her frame bent like a dried yam stalk, her wrapper faded and patched at the edges, was dragging a bundle of firewood nearly her size. She was not known in the market, nor did she seem familiar. She looked like someone who had come out of the forest itself. Her face was carved with lines like dry riverbeds, and her hands trembled under the weight she bore. Every few steps she paused to catch her breath, wiping sweat from her temple with a shaking hand. And yet, something in her posture was defiant, as if the wood, the years, and the hardship had never really defeated her. Odeyemi did not think. His body moved before his mind. He jogged up the slope, took the firewood bundle from her back without a word, and hoisted it over his shoulder. The woman turned slowly, surprised, and their eyes met. There was no fear in hers, just something older than fear. Something like recognition. She said nothing. He said nothing. She turned and began walking, her bare feet steady on the forest path ahead. He followed. They left the village behind, and the air grew cooler under the forest canopy. Birds chirped above, and leaves danced in the wind. The ground was uneven, covered in roots and stones, but Odeyemi never stumbled. The weight on his shoulder felt lighter than it should have, as though the woods had surrendered their burden to his resolve. The deeper they went, the more the world changed. The light filtering through the trees grew golden. The breeze whispered stories. The trees stood like ancient watchers, and still, she said nothing. When they finally reached her compound, it was unlike any place he had ever seen. A round hut stood at the center, its thatched roof still firm despite age. The walls were painted with old symbols, cowries, spirals, animals, and stars. There was no gate, but the perimeter was marked with smooth stones and carved wooden posts. It looked less like a home and more like a forgotten shrine. She pointed to the side of the hut, and he placed the firewood down gently. She turned to him, reached into a small calabash by the doorway, and brought out a piece of roasted yam wrapped in a banana leaf. She handed it to him. He hesitated, then took it with both hands. The warmth of the food traveled through his fingers, as if the yam itself carried memory. He sat on the ground and ate slowly, aware of her watching him. Each bite tasted like something from another life, not just nourishment but healing. As he finished, he looked up and saw that she had disappeared into the hut. He waited a while, expecting her to return with water or words. But nothing came, only silence. After some time, he rose to leave. Just as he reached the tree marking, the edge of the compound, he heard a faint sound behind him. Turning around, he saw a small carved stool placed by the base of the tree. On it was a cloth pouch, tied with a red string. He walked back cautiously, untied it, and found inside a black stone, smooth and round, wrapped with a coil of silver thread. Beneath it was a palm leaf with something written in Nko script. Though he couldn't read the words, he felt them. He did not understand what had happened, but he knew this moment would not be forgotten. That night, as he lay beneath his usual palm tree near the village square, he dreamt for the first time in years. In his dream, he saw the old woman, but younger, standing in a crowd as people bowed before her. Behind her stood the same round hut, only newer, glowing with golden light. Her voice echoed in his mind, not as words, but as a call to rise. When he woke up, the cloth pouch was still in his hand. The black stone pulsed faintly with warmth. The villagers noticed him the next day, not just with their eyes, but with their spirit. A child brought him mango slices. A woman offered Gary water. The chief's brother even asked him to sweep the palace veranda for pay. Something had shifted, not just around him, but within him. The nameless man who came from nowhere had carried more than firewood. He had carried a hidden burden. And in laying it down, he had unknowingly picked up a new destiny. By the second morning after helping the old woman, Odeyemi felt something strange stirring within him. He had grown used to numbness, days folding into nights like dirty wrappers, time slipping through his fingers like the village stream. But now he awoke before the roosters crowed, not from cold or hunger, but from a sensation in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. He no longer wandered aimlessly. He walked with direction, though even he could not explain it. The small, cloth pouch with the black stone and silver thread remained hidden inside his tattered waist bag. He carried it everywhere, unsure why, but certain it meant something. It was not just a gift. It was a key, though the door was yet unknown. The villagers began to look at him differently. Mama Bisi, who once poured dirty water near his resting, Spot to chase him away, now offered him a kara when she fried in the mornings. The chief's younger son, Aziz, asked him to help with fetching water from the river and paid him with clean clothes and leftover stew. Children who used to mock him now greeted him with shy smiles. The change was subtle, like smoke before fire, but it was real. Still, Odeyemi spoke little. He remained the quiet observer, a man molded by shame and loss, now slowly being reborn, by gratitude and mystery. But it was on the fourth evening, as the sun dipped like a coin into the western hills, that the wind carried a familiar scent through the air, burning leaves and aged wood. It stopped him in his tracks. His feet, as if drawn by memory, turned away from the market road and followed the breeze back toward the forest. The trees stood as guardians, unmoving yet alive. The further he walked, the quieter the world became. Even the birds ceased their songs. He passed the carved tree that marked the edge of the old woman's compound, but this time there was no firewood outside, no signs of life. The compound appeared deserted. The hut stood as before, symbols glowing faintly under the setting sun, but there was no sound, no presence. Still, he felt watched, not by malice, but by time itself. He sat on the carved stool she had left days earlier. He waited, but she did not come. He placed the black stone in his palm, closed his eyes, and let the silence speak. The wind whispered through the trees. Then he felt it, not with his skin, but with something deeper. The earth beneath him throbbed gently. The air shifted, and when he opened his eyes, the ground before him was damp as though it had just rained, though the sky was dry. There, in the center of the compound, was a shallow pit he had never noticed before. Curiosity tugged at him like an elder calling a child. He stepped into the pit. The moment his feet touched its center, a vision struck him like lightning through bone. He saw the old woman again, but not old. She was young, regal, wrapped in royal red, standing before a council of elders. They bowed to her. Children danced around her. Her voice rang out as command and comfort. Then fire, chaos, her hut ablaze, villagers scattering, betrayal, loneliness, silence. Centuries passed in moments. When he opened his eyes, his cheeks were wet, though he had not known he wept. The pit was empty, but his soul was not. He understood now. She was not merely a poor old woman. She was once a priestess, a guardian of ancient balance, forgotten by time, swallowed by fear, abandoned by her people. She had been walking the earth not just in age, but in waiting, for someone who would see her, not with eyes, but with reverence. Odeyemi had lifted her burden without knowing he was lifting her curse. As he left the forest, the sky darkened rapidly, and thunder grumbled in the clouds. But it did not rain. That night, the village square was restless. The air was too still. People spoke of strange dreams, of women weeping in the wind, of a glowing tree, of firewood that burst into flame without cause. Odeyemi said nothing. He sat under the palm tree, hands clasped, heart racing. At midnight, the gong sounded, not from the chief's palace, but from the sacred drum that had not been touched in 20 years. People poured into the square. Children cried. Elders trembled. And then they saw her. The old woman, her frame straightened by unseen force, walked barefoot into the circle of firelight. She wore the same wrapper, but now it glowed like woven moonlight. Her eyes were white as river shells, her skin radiant. Behind her stood Odeyemi, holding nothing but the black stone. The chief stepped forward, confused, trembling. The old woman raised her hand, and the ground cracked slightly beneath her feet. The carved stone at the center of the square split open, and from it emerged a rush of wind and a voice carried in many tongues. A truth long buried was now alive. She had waited for one soul pure enough to lift her burden, not with knowledge, but with humility. Odeyemi had done so, and in doing it, had restored her place, broken the village's silent curse, and unknowingly awoken a power that would soon change not just his fate, but the fate of all Ilado. And as dawn crept into the sky, Odeyemi stood, no longer a homeless man. He stood as the one chosen by the forgotten, anointed by history, and remembered by the forest. A man who carried firewood and received a crown in return. The sun rose over Ilado, not with warmth, but with judgment. It bathed the village in golden light, yet its rays felt heavy. People awoke with hearts pounding, unsure if the night had been a dream or a reckoning. The memory of the old woman glowing, like moonstone standing beside the homeless man, was etched into every soul. Some spoke her name in hushed tones. Iya Awelewa, the forgotten priestess. Others dared not speak at all, for fear they might invoke something older than their ancestors' bones. But Odeyemi did not hide. He did not run. He remained seated, beneath the same palm tree that had sheltered his solitude. Only now the villagers passed him with bowed heads. Some offered him food, others tokens, a carved comb, a necklace of beads, a gourd of honeyed water. He accepted none of them, not out of pride, but because his heart was still kneeling before a truth he could not yet name. By the third day, elders gathered at the chief's palace, troubled. Chickens were laying double-yolked eggs. Twins were being born across the village. The river behind the shrine that had dried up 10 years ago was now bubbling and full. The ground beneath the market became fertile overnight, and yams sprouted. Without seed, the villagers called it a miracle, the elders called it balance, but the chief called it a threat. He had not forgotten the night the sacred drum beat without permission. He remembered the glowing woman and the vagrant who stood behind her like a shadow of destiny. Odeyemi had not challenged him, but in silence he had stolen the reverence of the people. In secret, the chief summoned Durojaye, the keeper of forbidden stories. He was an old man who lived in the shrine's shadows, and whose tongue had been silent since the last great drought. The chief offered him palm oil and goat meat, begging him to speak. And speak he did, in a voice that rasped like dried leaves. He told of a time when Ilado was ruled not by kings, but by wisdom. When Iya Awelewa, a child of the forest spirits, had healed the sick, spoken to the rivers, and carried the sorrow of the land on her shoulders. But men grew greedy. They feared her power. They burned her shrine. They scattered her followers. And with her banishment, Ilado began to rot, slowly, quietly, like fruit dying from the seed. Durojaye warned the chief that her return meant judgment, not peace. The village owed a debt to her soul. The land was trying to repay it, not out of kindness, but necessity. And Odeyemi, the man who carried her burden, was now the bearer of that debt. The chief listened, heart torn between fear and fury. He feared the power that now shimmered around the man they once scorned. But he also feared being forgotten, for in every eye that looked to Odeyemi, he saw his own authority erode. That night, as Odeyemi walked quietly to the riverbank to wash, a child followed him, a small girl, barefoot, carrying a cracked calabash filled with oil. She said nothing, only placed it beside him and ran back into the shadows. When he opened the pouch, he saw the black stone glowing faintly again, but now it pulsed like a heartbeat, as if it was alive. As he bent to touch the water, the river rippled before his hands reached it. Then it parted slightly, just enough for him to see the shimmering reflection of a face not his own, young, regal, with white eyes and silver markings. It was her, Iya Awelewa. The river did not speak in words, but the wind carried her thoughts. She had returned to restore, but her restoration would not come without pain. For a village to be reborn, its rotting roots had to be dug up. And Odeyemi, in his humility, had been chosen to wield the blade, not of violence, but of memory. He was to remind the people of what they buried and what it cost them. He was to carry not just firewood, but truth. As dawn broke, drums echoed across Ilado, not from the palace, but from the hills. Young men and women had gathered on the edge of the forest, where birds sang louder and fruits ripened overnight. They stood in a circle around Odeyemi, waiting, not for orders, but for guidance. He did not know why they followed him, only that their eyes were not filled with worship, but with understanding. They too had been overlooked, rejected, mocked, or forgotten. And now, drawn by a force older than lineage, they came to build something new. Together they began to clear the old path to the ancient shrine. It had been swallowed by weeds and silence. But with each strike of the machete, the past groaned awake. Old carvings emerged on stone. Pots buried in ash were found unbroken. A clay statue of a woman with arms open to the sky was still intact, her face weathered but beautiful. And at the foot of the shrine, a small wooden stool remained, untouched by termites. Odeyemi sat on it. When he placed the black stone on the shrine's altar, the sky trembled. A soft rain began to fall, though no cloud could be seen. The villagers who had followed to watch gasped as the water turned golden where it touched the altar. The wind whispered again, not in fear, but in peace. That evening, a great fire was lit in the square. But this time, it was not for punishment. It was for remembrance. Women sang old songs that hadn't been heard in decades. Men poured libations with trembling hands. The chief, watching from the edge, knew his reign had shifted. The village no longer belonged to power, but to truth. And Odeyemi, once the nameless wanderer, sat quietly beside the shrine, the black stone now dim, his heart full. He had not asked for purpose. But by lifting the burden of a forgotten woman, He had inherited a story larger than himself. And Ilado would never be the same again. The wind changed in Ilado. It no longer came only to scatter dust or dry the lips of children. Now, it carried stories, whispers from the shrine, songs from the forest, and the name of a man who had once been invisible. Odeyemi, the nameless one, had become the voice of memory. He did not wear a crown. He did not sit on the throne in the chief's palace. Yet, when he walked through the village, people stepped aside. They greeted him not as a beggar, but as the one who had reminded the earth of its promise. Children sat by his feet to listen. Women brought him food, not out of pity, but from reverence. Men asked for his advice when their yams refused to grow, or their dreams grew heavy with shadows. Yet Odeyemi remained simple. He still wore clothes, patched with humility. He still slept near the shrine, under the same tree where he once nursed wounds no one could see. But within him lived a new rhythm, a quiet voice that guided his steps. Iya Awelewa no longer appeared in visions, but her presence remained. Birds sang differently when he passed. Trees bent slightly as though bowing. The river now ran clear, and the fish returned in numbers that made the elders shake their heads in wonder. But not everyone rejoiced. The chief had grown bitter in silence. Though he smiled in public, though he clapped at the songs sung in Odeyemi's honor, his heart beat with envy. He remembered the old days, when his voice silenced markets, when villagers bowed low just to catch his shadow. Now, they whispered, that the land listened more to the barefooted man by the shrine than to the crowned one in the palace. He consulted with his inner circle. Some advised him to wait, some warned him to act, but one, a wealthy merchant named Falola, suggested something darker, that if Odeyemi disappeared, the village would forget again. So one moonless night, as frogs croaked and lanterns flickered in their clay holders, the plan was made. 3 masked men crept toward the shrine. They carried no guns, only knives and cloth soaked in herbs to silence screams. But as they reached the base of the tree, where Odeyemi slept, they froze. A wind rose, not a loud one, but sharp, piercing. It howled like a wounded spirit. The tree above shook violently, though no other tree in the forest moved. From the earth came a groan, like a drumbeat from the underworld. Then came the fireflies. Thousands of them, glowing bright red instead of yellow, swirling around the shrine like an army of eyes. The men dropped their knives and ran, blinded by light, deafened by silence. When they reached the village square, they fell to their knees, trembling, unable to speak. By dawn, news spread like oil on fire. The shrine had awakened to protect its own. The old ways had not died. They had only been waiting. The chief denied knowledge, but no one believed him. His authority, already brittle, cracked completely. The council of elders, many of whom had remained neutral, now sided with tradition. They named Odeyemi the Keeper of the Path, a title older than chieftaincy, given only to those chosen by the land itself. He refused robes or riches, but accepted the duty. He would not rule with power. He would guide with remembrance. From that day, Ilado changed not with noise, but with peace. The shrine became a place of healing. Women came to pray for wombs that had been silent. Men came to confess dreams they feared. Children came to ask about the stars, the soil, and the stories. Odeyemi taught them what he knew, not from books, but from experience. That humility was not weakness, that service was strength, that lifting someone's burden could awaken destinies buried deep beneath dust and shame. One dry season, when the sky cracked with heat and the wells began to choke, Odeyemi disappeared for 3 days. The village searched the hills, the forest, even the markets of nearby towns. But on the morning of the 4th day, he returned, barefoot and smiling. He had found an underground stream near the old banana grove. Water poured from it like grace. The villagers named it Awelewa's Spring. The water never ran dry again. Years passed. The chief grew old and died quietly. His son refused the throne, saying the land already had its leader. Odeyemi never claimed that title. He said the land was not his. It belonged to those who listened. Traders came from other regions to see the village of miracles. They asked for the secret. The villagers pointed to a man who once had no name, no shoes, and no voice. The man who carried firewood and found a forgotten priestess. When Odeyemi finally closed his eyes for the last time, it was under the same tree he had once used as a bed. His body was buried not with kings, but at the foot of the shrine. On his grave was carved no name, only words. He carried her burden and lifted us all. And the wind of Ilado still remembers him. It sings his story to the leaves, hums it into the river, and whispers it into the ears of children not yet born. The man who bent to lift a bundle of wood and rose with the weight of a village's redemption.